Hello there, welcome to the Saraway channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And we're on part 3 of our story tonight, and what an exciting story it is with so many supernatural experiences. It boggles the mind, and it's only going to get better. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dylan has grown up in a very sheltered home where his father is a professor, his mother works at a laboratory testing samples. They're both very rigidly structured and they don't believe in ghosts and encrypted creatures, and they've certainly influenced Dylan growing up so that he's been very closed-minded. But his friends came back from a fishing holiday, the O'Connor brothers, who are his best friends, and they told him about a paranormal experience that they had had, where they encountered a very strange ghostly creature that they weren't sure was even human, that had the ability to shapeshift, and it was known as the shapeshifter. And so intrigued was Dylan that he started to get a paranormal itch. So he's managed to persuade the O'Connor brothers to come with him to the cemetery in the dead of night, in the hope that they might encounter something paradoxical. The question is, will they? Your guess is as good as mine. So let's continue with part 3 of our story tonight. I was hoping that Ethan and Nicholas would be waiting for me by the cemetery gates, but my heart sank like a heavy stone being flung into a huge body of water when I realised they weren't there, and for a brief, very discouraging moment, I thought they may not be coming at all. And the disappointment I felt was exponential. I knew there was no way on God's earth that I would dare to climb over the cemetery gates myself and boldly explore the cemetery in the middle of the night like this. Not on my own, not without the O'Connor brothers at my side, for I knew that there was safety in numbers. Hand on heart, I wasn't brave enough to go in there on my own. I'm not that courageous, nor am I that stupid. As I stood outside the rather ornate, intimidating black wrought iron gates of the cemetery that seemed to be telling me to keep away, in a silent non-verbal communication, so to speak, I gingerly peered through the bars. The whole place really did look rather gloomy and grim, under the soft illumination of the moonlight, which I'm afraid only served to cruelly highlight just how inscrutably ghoulish the cemetery actually was. No wonder so many people avoided this place like the plague, for it would have been the perfect setting to host a Stephen King movie that would leave the viewer on the edge of their seat, biting their fingernails in trepidation, for the atmosphere of this cemetery was all you needed to conjure up a scene depicting your worst and most horrifying nightmares. I was reflecting over this rather soberly. Suddenly I was overcome with a reluctant hesitancy about this nonsensical, harebrained endeavour, which had been my lunatically illogical idea in the very first place. All of a sudden I heard Ethan and Nicholas's muffled voices, along with a shuffle of feet, as they approached me at the cemetery gate. Ostensibly a sense of profound relief washed over my face when I saw them, and all my burgeoning doubts were somewhat held to ransom, for a moment anyway. "I thought you weren't coming," I said almost accusingly. "You took your time. It's already 10-1, I said, pointing at my watch. "You're 5 minutes late." "Keep your hair on, Dylan," said Ethan, slapping me on the back in a jovial manner that I didn't find remotely amusing. Well, not at this late hour of the night, anyway. "We're here now, are we not? We didn't let you down, did we? We've kept our promise to you. Are you still up for this, Dylan? I mean, do you really want to do this? Feel free to change your mind." I could see that Ethan's sanguine face looked rather hopeful, almost as if he was about to sigh with relief if I were to say no, that is. "No, I don't want to do this." But I didn't oblige his clandestine wishes, because now that the O'Connor brothers were finally here at the cemetery gate, turning around to go home seemed like a half-witted thing to do, when an opportunistic adventure like this lay before us, rather like an uncharted treasure map that we were yet to explore. "Of course I'm up for this," I said with a measure of mock bravado, for I assure you, I wasn't as confident as I appeared. But I wasn't going to let the O'Connor brothers know that, for if they saw any hesitancy in my demeanour, they might encourage me to leave, and I couldn't have that. "I told you I want to see a ghost," I affirmed. "I didn't come here just to go home, did I? That would be completely defeatist on my part." Ethan pulled a regretful face, and there was an uncertain look in his eyes, which revealed to me he really didn't want to be doing this, and was already engaging in feelings of grave doubt. "I hope you're not going to be disappointed, Dylan," he said rather candidly. "You see, if you're expecting to see a ghost, I think it's extremely unlikely that you will. Well, I mean, get your wishes fulfilled. That's what I'm trying to say." "I know," I said. "But if you don't dip your hand into the water, you may never know what the temperature is, will you? Staying at home is only going to ensure that I never get to see what I'm hoping to see. But I appreciate the fact that there are no guarantees in anything." "Good, Dylan. I'm glad you get it. At least I sincerely hope you do. I want to remind you that the fact that me and Nicholas spotted something very strange on our fishing holiday doesn't mean it's going to happen again. In fact, it's very unlikely that it will. Maybe you won't see anything at all. My bet is that ghostly encounters usually happen to people who are completely caught off guard and are not expecting to see anything. Not to someone such as yourself, actively seeking out to experience something paranormal. What is it they say? A watched pot never boils. All I'm saying, bro, is don't blame us if we don't see anything. I just don't want you to feel disheartened, that's all. This cemetery has a fierce and haunted reputation, but there is no guarantee that it will live up to its wild rumours. The place might appear intimidating, but it could be very benign for all we know. I don't know much about this cemetery, because growing up my mother told us to keep well away from the place." I was not remotely discouraged by Ethan's warning words, for in my gut I really believed something paradoxical would happen that night. Why I felt that way, I'm not entirely certain. Inwardly I was practically begging the universe to make something unusual happen. I guess all my life exciting things always seemed to happen to other people, and never to me. I was the one that was always excluded from all the fun, as I had been on the O'Connors' fishing holiday. Ethan and Nicholas had assured me that there was nothing remotely fun about their terrifying experience with the shapeshifter they'd encountered in the woods. But I guess if the truth be told, I wanted a story of my own, that maybe one day I could share with my grandchildren, when they asked me if I had a ghost story to share with them. Doesn't every grandfather want to tell their grandkids a good old story? I know I would. It was pretty easy to scale the tall gates of the cemetery, which had been locked with a chain. Needless to say, they did rattle rather precariously, as we jumped over to the other side rather effortlessly. But then again, we were all reasonably nimble, so it wasn't much of a problem for us. Once we were on the premises, we followed the smooth asphalt paths around the graves, where rows of graves interspersed with perfectly pristine manicured grass and beds of white roses stretched out over vast areas of the cemetery. Indeed, there were crowded areas in the cemetery where so many graves stood together side by side, in solemn rows like an army of dead soldiers that weren't going anywhere any time soon. Some graves were ornate and rather lavish, others plain and very simplex, but all of these graves spoke of people that had all gone from this life, some taken long before their due time, and others that had been lucky to live a long, hearty, and hopefully full life. The sad, melancholic tombstones seemed to seek solace and humble reflection under the tenebrific sky, while wisps of pearly moonlight loomed over the headstones rather warily, casting somewhat menacing shadows over the graves, so that everything looked insidiously airy and pretentiously foreboding. From the moment we entered the cemetery, I felt a thrilling, rather incongruous mix of uneasiness and excitement at the very same time, that trickled down my spine in a cold rush of air, which was rather exhilarating, I have to say, like the feeling you get when riding a roller coaster. Something felt so off from the moment we entered the cemetery, but I wasn't sure where this disruptive, invasive feeling actually came from. I didn't want anything to spoil our fun, As after all, it wasn't every day that you broke into a cemetery at the dead of night like this. My gut was beginning to twist itself into a tangle of knots, and my parched throat had become somewhat scratchy and very dry. Why was I feeling this creeped out, I wondered? I hadn't seen anything yet. We hadn't even started yet in exploring the cemetery. But I suspected the anticipation of what we were doing made me feel as if I was about to jump out of an aeroplane from a dizzyingly great height with a parachute. So was it any wonder I was feeling slightly out of sorts, somewhat overwhelmed? It was perfectly normal to feel like this, I told myself, for when you were circumnavigating a cemetery at the dead of night, anyone would feel the same way. "It is rarely spooky in this cemetery," said Ethan, looking around himself rather nervously. "I mean, it certainly didn't feel like this in the woods when we followed what we assumed was Mr. Markham. This place is infinitely more sinister. If my mother knew we were in here, she'd do her nuts, let me tell you. You know how she feels about this cemetery anyway, Dylan. She swears the place is haunted. So we've come to the right place. But as I keep telling you, don't get your hopes up. I will admit that I've never seen a place more oppressively gloomy. Even the moonlight here does little to subdue the hostile, unearthly feeling of this place." Ethan fumbled around in his top pocket of his shirt and pulled out a box of Marlboro cigarettes, along with a lighter. I could hardly believe it. "You don't even smoke, Ethan," I said teasingly. "What are you doing with a box of cigarettes and a lighter? You haven't taken up the habit, have you?" "No, of course not," he said with a big cheeky grin. "I came armed with reinforcements, did I not? Because if there's any time one needs to smoke, it's right now. I thought it would serve to calm down our nerves. I mean, look at you, Dylan," he said, casting a wary gaze upon me. "You're acting like this is no big deal to you, bro. Even though you've been very enthusiastic about coming to the cemetery. But I hate to say it, you've been giving yourself away. You forget I've known you for a long time. You're shaking like a leaf, and you're wearing a rigidly stiff expression on your face, as if your muscles are all clenched tightly together, and we haven't even started exploring the cemetery yet." "Don't mind me, Ethan," I said, straightening my back up defensively, but I knew Ethan was absolutely right. Even though I was genuinely excited to be here, another part of me was literally shaking in my boots. What if something did happen? How would I actually react to it? My fingers were shaking as I took a cigarette from Ethan, which he lit, and I gratefully began to draw in all that delicious nicotine, which I really needed right now. "I know I look on edge," I conceded. "I guess I'm genuinely spooked by this place. But anyone would be in our place. It's perfectly normal to feel this way, I'm most sure. Still, it doesn't change the fact that I'm genuinely very glad we came here tonight. I did initially have a few reservations when I got out of bed," I admitted. "I mean, I would have happily continued to sleep. But now that I'm wide awake, I'm very grateful to be here. But I should have probably taken a tranquilizer," I teased, "because then I'd be a whole lot less apprehensive than I am right now. You're right, though. I am on edge. I will admit that. Not a good idea if you took a tranquilizer, bro," said Nicholas. "You might have passed out in the cemetery. But personally, I think being in bed would be infinitely more preferable than being out here tonight. Are we all mad or something, coming out here in the middle of the night like this?" he teased, giving me a mischievous wink. "Thanks," I said, as I acknowledged both of the O'Connor brothers. "For agreeing to do this, I mean, and coming with me tonight, and accommodating this irrational urge of mine to scratch a paranormal itch, so to speak. I couldn't have done this on my own without you guys." Nicholas chuckled. "Too right you wouldn't have done this on your own, bro. Are you kidding me? No one in their right mind would dream of coming to the cemetery during the witching hour. It's bad enough coming here during the day. Even my mother won't do it. This is not something I ever would have done willingly. But I was persuaded by Ethan to come here tonight, in order to support you. But I have to tell you, there is something malevolent about this cemetery. I mean, it's supposed to be a place of rest, is it not? But if I was buried here, Peace is the last thing I would find under one of those grim-looking tombstones, let me tell you." "You're right," I admitted. "Come hell or high water. When I die, I wouldn't want to be buried here. I think I'd prefer to be cremated than be left to be consumed by the worms. It's not a pretty thought. Don't think about that, Dylan. You're still young, like us. Death is a long way off for us," said Nicholas reassuringly. But when he said that, I didn't feel remotely reassured. I suddenly became all the more aware of my own mortality, for I hadn't failed to observe that many graves that surrounded us were occupied by younger people, which suddenly made me aware of just how fragile life really is, and I didn't want to entertain those sobering thoughts, not when I was only 18 years old. "Why do you think the cemetery is so— what is the word I'm looking for?" Ethan interjected. "Well, so very disquieting, I think the word is. I feel very certain we're not welcome here. I have a profound sense that we're being watched all the time. By something insidiously evil. Maybe after our hellish experience in the woods when we were away on our fishing holiday has heightened my level of trepidation. I'm probably very foolishly allowing my imagination to play tricks with me by creating ghosts and ghoulies in my mind. Maybe I should become an author," he joked. "I feel the same way," said Nicholas, taking a puff of his cigarette. "These smokes are lifesavers, let me tell you. Great idea of yours, Ethan. To bring them along with you, that is. My nerves are already more steady. Perhaps this graveyard feels, unwelcoming, because possibly there are some nefarious characters buried here. People who refuse to go to the light. Possibly because they're terrified of going to hell. People who may potentially have murdered someone, done some insanely evil things. Think about it. If there is a life after death, and you've been a bad person throughout your life, or maybe just very selfish and self-centered and stuff like that, maybe you'd be very reluctant to cross over to the other side, in case there is a hell. You would know you would be burnt in the lake of fire for an eternity, so you wouldn't want to go there. I rather suspect once you're dead, it's too late to repent of your sins. Maybe the dark energy from those lost souls that were not good in life has robbed this place of its peace. Maybe lost, tormented souls like that roam this graveyard at night, and we can easily pick up on their hostile energy, as they're bound to resent the living, don't you think? As they no longer occupy a physical body like we do, which is maybe why we feel disproportionately on edge. That would make a whole lot of sense, don't you think? But if that were the case, would such dark spirits really hang out here?" I asked. "Why not? They're close to their bodies, are they not? Their bodies are of no use any more, I will admit, but I suppose you can be attached to your body, even after death. I've heard that people can be attached to things. Sometimes it may be a signet ring they wore in life that meant a lot to them, or a memento from the war. But why not the body they once occupied in life?" "Well, I hadn't thought of it like that," I admitted, "but what you say does give me the heebie-jeebies. I'm not going to lie." We sat on the grassy verge next to a large grave, belonging to a young man called Tom Searchman, born in 1952 and died in 1979. So he'd not had a very long life, regrettably. I wondered to myself why he died, but the tombstone gave very little away about his life, and only said, "You'll never be forgotten, dear one." I liked Tom Searchman's grave for some reason. It was comforting to me. We began to smoke together, and even shared a few jokes that were probably not all that funny, but they lifted our spirits immeasurably, and you need a jolly good laugh when you're in a tense, uncongenial environment that puts you instinctively on edge. We smoked about 3 cigarettes each, and the relief I felt from smoking was immense, as the nicotine appeared to have numbed our nerves, and in that quintessential moment I could fully appreciate why some people have a desperate need to smoke a cigarette, a habit that my father would describe as really nasty, even though the adverts on television in the 80s made smoking seem like a really cool thing to do. When you see country and western heroes riding on horseback into the wilderness, those adverts seriously made smoking come across as extremely glamorous. We glanced around the graves and acclimatized ourselves to the dingy darkness and to the shifting shadows that teased our imaginations, for very often something umbrageous would move in my peripheral vision, and I would turn around to look in that direction, and nothing was there. Both Ethan and Nicholas claimed to be experiencing the very same weird, bizarre phenomenon. But we persuaded ourselves that at night the penumbra light effects could be extremely deceiving. We could hear the pretty trill of crickets and frogs, and with our renewed confidence we felt inspired to continue on our intrepid journey through the sprawling cemetery, which seemed to spread out over a wide distance. We threw our cigarette stubs onto the ground and used our boots to stub out any light embers. We sashayed rather aimlessly from one grave to another, reading all the names out loud and talking about the people that were now occupying those grave sites, pondering to ourselves who they might have been in life, and actually it was an interesting experience. I'm glad to say for a moment all trepidation and feelings of disquiet abandoned us, but this short burst of tranquillity, I'm afraid, would not last for very long. We also came upon Bob Markham's grave that was so well tended, but I wouldn't have expected anything less from Mrs. Markham. She cared for her late husband's gravesite as punctiliously as she did for her two beloved grey schnauzers, Percy and Polly. There was a pretty display of fresh white roses in a vase on the gravestone, which was a huge granite slab that must have cost a pretty penny. But Mrs. Markham had spared no expense as far as her late husband was concerned. I remember Bob Markham's funeral had been excessively over the top, with a glamorous horse and carriage, along with all kinds of extravagant trimmings. "Poor Mrs. Markham," I said, looking at the grave, with a melancholic sadness across my face that I couldn't hide. "I don't know about you guys, but I liked Bob Markham when he was alive. A jolly good man he was." "He sure was," Ethan agreed with me. "But I know he didn't want to be buried." "He didn't?" I asked in surprise. "No, he didn't. But Mrs. Markham told him, if he went first, whether he liked it or not, he was going to be buried. She said she never wanted to have him turning into a pile of ashes. This is a double plot, you know, that she purchased. And when Mrs. Markham goes, she wants to be buried right here next to her husband. And when her dogs pass away, she's asked her daughter Veronica to scatter their ashes on her gravesite. She considers her dogs to be her beloved family. I think she'd have got them their own separate plots as well in this graveyard, but I don't think they allow that, because I understand they told her that this was not a pet cemetery. So she's going to have to make do with having the ashes sprinkled on her grave." In truth, I'd never realized quite how dauntingly large the cemetery actually was, for it appeared to go on for ever and ever. We decided to venture towards the older graves at the back of the cemetery, opposite the wooded area, for that was the place I was sure would be the most haunted, for many of those souls resting under those sad-looking tombstones, where decay had set in, and long since cruelly expunged their names. I noticed that the temperature in that part of the cemetery dropped significantly, and it became so cold that I involuntarily began to shiver, wishing I'd brought something warmer with me to wear. In this sequestered, rather solemn part of the graveyard, the atmosphere was dizzyingly electric. It was also tense and foreboding, and I was hit with the overwhelming sense that we were not welcome here, as if something wanted us gone before we'd even arrived. "Look at this twisted grave covered in moss and lichen," I said to Ethan and Nicholas, who acknowledged the grave in sad reflection. I ran my hand over the surface of the grave to feel its texture. This poor person has long since been forgotten about. Look at the weeds and overgrown grass in this part of the cemetery. Nobody cares about these lost souls any more. Some of these graves are a few 100 years old, I believe." Nicholas said, "Well, I guess the caretaker is too lazy to concern himself with this part of the cemetery. Would it really hurt him to cut the grass and remove some of the vines and weeds? It would certainly look a whole lot better if he did that. Some people just don't care, do they?" It was a sober sight indeed, to see these sad tombstones, purging their way through the hardened ground, like ugly jagged teeth in a gumless mouth. They had been so obviously forgotten and forsaken, almost as if their souls were no longer of any significance. The grass, of course, was all long and untamed, while ugly weeds and burgeoning vines were strangling many of the graves. One creeper had practically smothered the entire grave, as if suffocating it so that it could barely breathe. I was so upset about this, and appalled that it had been left in such shoddy condition. So indignantly I began to pull away the leafy tentacles, to expose the derelict grave that lay beneath. It took me mere seconds to do, and annoyed me that the caretaker of the graveyard could be so sloppy. They shouldn't allow the graves to get like this, I thought indignantly. I don't care how old these graves are. I think these dead people deserve a bit of dignity in death. All of a sudden I felt Ethan touch me on my shoulder, as if to calm my angst. Perhaps he'd picked up on it. "Don't do that, Ethan," I said, rather startled. "You scared me half to death. You made me jump out of my skin." I turned around to give him a glare. "Do what?" asked Ethan innocently. He was standing next to me. "Don't mess with me, Ethan," I snapped. "It's not funny. You put your hand on my shoulder, didn't you?" "No, I didn't," Ethan said. "But someone touched me. I know they did," I insisted. Ethan shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly, as did Nicholas. They both duly confirmed that neither of them had touched me. Of course I believed Nicholas, because he would have admitted straight away if he'd done so. But I wasn't sure that I believed Ethan, because I knew he had a wicked sense of humour, and I wouldn't put anything past him. I knew he'd probably touch me just to freak me the hell out, and it had worked. But I wasn't going to be duped by his cruel little prank, nor was I going to fall for it either. He probably wanted to scare me so we'd leave the cemetery forthwith, and I'm sorry, but that was not going to happen. He'd have to try a little harder than that to make me lose my nerve. All of a sudden we heard what I can only describe as the most airy scream. It sounded like a woman being murdered, and the sound was so terrifying that I froze to the spot. This was not a rogue stunt that Ethan had pulled on me. This was real, and the scream was so ear-piercing it sent shockwaves through my entire body, as if a violent windstorm had whipped right through me. "What the hell? Did you hear that?" said Nicholas, his voice lowering to an urgent, muted whisper. "My God! It sounds as if a woman is being murdered, being attacked by a mob of angry predators, or men. Look at me. I'm shaking all over. Let's get the hell out of here." I noticed Nicholas's face was now stripped of all its colour, and a look of terror had descended across him, the likes of such I'd never observed on him before. His whole body trembled like a tree in a heavy windstorm, and his obvious anxiety was infectious, as we all were overcome with a sense of grave consternation, knowing in our guts that if we didn't get the hell out of the cemetery, something very bad was about to happen to us. "I agree with you," said Ethan. "Something doesn't feel right in here. I feel as if we've been watched all the time, and someone's physically touched Dylan. Something is definitely toying with us. I know it is. The place is giving me the creeps. I don't know why the hell we agreed to do this. Is there something wrong with us? We get spooked on our fishing trip, and we come here to get spooked again. Are we completely deranged or something? This is not funny. I want to get out of the cemetery now." "Oh my God," I said. "Look over there." I pointed towards the trees, where we saw some yellow orbs of light floating around in circles, moving in and out of the trees of the woodgrove. There was something sinister about the way they moved that left me feeling very troubled indeed, for I felt those circles of light were not only watching us, but toying with us as well, and whatever they were intrinsically evil. "Oh my God! Nicholas, Ethan, look over there!" I pointed to the trees, where we saw some strange yellow orbs of light, floating around in circles and weaving themselves in and out of the trees. There was something about the way they moved, something insidiously nefarious, that left me feeling exceedingly troubled. I felt these circles of light were not only watching us, but playing games with us, and whatever they were intrinsically evil. Of that I was in no doubt. "My God," said Ethan. "Look, Nicholas! Look at those orbs of light! What the hell do you think they are?" "Maybe they're souls," said Nicholas, staring at the light orbs in astonishment, for this was not what we had expected to see. The light orbs floated in and out of the woodgrove. 2 of them clearly had faces on them, with very macabre-looking grins, and soon all the light orbs revealed their faces to us. In that moment, I don't think I'd ever been more terrified. I was now completely done with this place. We had to leave at once. There was no time like the present. "Let's leave now!" I cried out urgently. In that second I realized that ghost hunting was not as thrilling as I thought it would be. I wanted out of our adventure. In this part of the graveyard I had felt so cold, but now that we had witnessed these enigmatic light orbs, the atmosphere shifted considerably, and it became insufferably cloying and incredibly close, as if our bodies were caught under a hand dryer in a toilet cubicle. The circulating warm air seemed to be sticking to us like the grit under our fingernails. I was suddenly feeling so claustrophobic, as if I could no longer breathe any more, almost as if those light orbs were feeding off our energy reserves. What happened next was so startling. I've never known a time when I've lost control of my own body, but when I turned around to leave the graveyard, I couldn't do it. I knew the light orbs that I am now convinced were malevolent spirits or demonic entities had complete control over us, and there wasn't a damn thing we could do about it. We were caught under the stronghold of their torment. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 tonight. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.